The show focused on delivering beneficial information on everything to do with products and services that can improve your life. This is Experts on Call on AM 650.
And we're back, and this is Talk About Strata on Experts on Call. I'm Tony Giavento, your host. We have in the studio with us Pat Williams, who is a lawyer in Vancouver with Clark Wilson, and who is the chair of the BC Law Institute Research Committee on the Strata Property Act. And we're talking tonight about the liquidation aspect of strata corporations. And this is becoming more and more in the mind of many smaller strata corporations that are in high-density areas. There are only 38 units where there potentially could be 100 units on a space, and older buildings requiring more cost, more upgrades, and the feasibility of sustaining some of the older buildings. So we have an email from John in North Vancouver, and the email deals with liquidation and with strata corporations. We live in a typical 25-unit older apartment building that is 35 years old. Current assessed values are $250,000 a unit, and I assume per average per unit because they're all slightly different in size, and they are due for a new elevator and upgrades to roofing and decking. The cost per unit is going to be around $60,000 a unit, which, given the history of buildings not being maintained, is not surprising. The average size of the units is 2 bedrooms. For the 2-bedroom units is about 1,100 square feet. They've had a developer approach us and offered us $195,000 a unit to purchase the building. Several owners are advocating that rather than repair the units, we consider the sale. However, 4 owners who purchased in the last 5 years at the height of the market, and several have mortgages over $210,000. So, they've got a number of questions. But the first question is, and this goes back, Pat, to the charge holders. If they're successful in getting a unanimous vote, what happens to those people who have mortgages that are higher than the value that they do a sellout for?
Well, a mortgage is a contract. And it's a contract in which someone has agreed that they will pay a mortgage company a certain amount of money. So all the mortgage is security for the debt. So just because this is sold and you get $195,000 per unit doesn't necessarily mean that the mortgage is paid off. It could mean that an owner who has a mortgage of $210,000 would still owe $15,000 on that owner's mortgage. In other words, they would get $195,000 for their unit. They have a $210,000 mortgage, so $15,000 is going to be remaining. The mortgage company may agree not to ask for the $15,000, but as long as a person is paying their mortgage on time, I guess the rhetorical question is, why would a mortgage company agree with that?
Right.
Usually when you've got foreclosures, it's because people cannot pay their mortgage. We're assuming in this situation that people can pay their mortgage, but if they sold their unit, the security for that mortgage isn't going to be enough to pay off the complete mortgage.
Well, and we have a problem with older buildings where buyers bought into the height of the market, where they bought, maybe paid $300,000 for a unit, which is now has an assessed value of $275,000, and because the building is aging and the value, of course, has not been maintained, and now they're faced with the $60,000 special levy. So we have this problem that's rising now in the industry, where we have some individuals who simply have no credit left to borrow money. So if they don't sell the unit, what will end up happening is they won't be able to pay the special levy for the repairs that need to be done, which ends up in a foreclosure for the bank in any case.
Correct, and that's the one thing that's not in John's email.
Right.
Is you've got 25 units, but he doesn't say how many of the owners of those 25 units cannot afford the $60,000 levy that's going to be placed upon them for a new elevator and upgrades to their roofing and decking. There could be 4 or 5 people in that complex who cannot afford $60,000. They've already got a mortgage of $210,000, so they can't go to the mortgage company and get more, especially if the mortgage company thinks that in fact it's only worth $195,000. What that means is when the special levy's passed, and it has to be passed for them to comply with the act.
Yes.
That means there's going to be a number of those owners who are going to have liens put against their property, and those properties are going to be sold. So it's a very draconian situation, but those people are going to lose their homes anyway.
Right, right. And that's one of the difficulties we have. And of course, the introduction of depreciation reports in the last year has been significant for strata corporations, especially older buildings, because now they're starting to face into the reality of, what was always there. They knew that they were going to have to do repairs to the building eventually. Now they know consciously what it's going to be, when it's going to come. And now they're faced with, of course, some significant increase in cost, both for strata fees, for annual contributions, and for major repairs.
Absolutely, but they have to meet those extra expenses because they need a contingency fund, if I can use that word, a contingency fund, which is much greater than what typically has been done in the past. In the past, strata corporations have low contingency funds, and whenever a major repair is necessary, they do a special levy. The depreciation report is intended to make it much easier down the road to improve and upgrade your building, or at least maintain it to a level that's necessary. But that means it's going to be a significant more amount per month.
So one of the challenges of redevelopment, and this we are seeing, and people are asking this question, is the value of the unit that they're actually selling is not necessarily enough if they're liquidating to buy into the new development. That's one of the problems that's coming up. And so we're potentially creating a housing issue. If you're selling your unit, the developer, you've come up with a deal, the Strata Corporation agrees, they've passed a unanimous vote, all the stars aligned, and everybody's getting $225,000 or whatever their proportional base is. What happens if in the new development the cheapest units are $309,000? Especially when we're dealing with retired individuals and fixed incomes, and how do people continue to afford to own property and buy in as their buildings are aging? And that's maybe that one of the messages is how important it is to protect the asset value of your building.
Absolutely, and I mean the options when that occurs is to live in a much smaller unit.
Yes.
Or to move and live in for them, a less desirable area.
Right. So, which is one of the difficulties that people have to struggle with when they're looking at liquidation.
Absolutely.
If we get through the scenario where a building has actually voted to liquidate, they've actually voted to dissolve, and they're selling the units, how is the money divvied up? The developer comes up with a value, because under the Condominium Act, we had a schedule called interest on destruction. Now under the Strata Property Act, it's unit entitlement. So how is the money actually distributed to the owners?
I think it would be distributed based upon unit entitlement.
Yes.
And unit entitlement is based on habitable square area, whereas interest on destruction was based upon a number of intangibles.
Right.
So, for example, a person say a 4-story building, a person on the 4-story with a larger limited common property deck, the habitable square area may be the same as the person on the 1st floor, but the value of that 4th floor unit is significantly higher than the value of the 1st floor unit. And so if that owner of the 4th floor unit is since that owner is one of those people who has to vote in favor, they may say, I'm not going to vote in favor unless I get significantly more than my friend neighbor on the 1st floor.
Yes, yes.
That creates problems in and of itself, because those people who don't think they're going to get enough money when comparing it to the other units in the same building are then going to vote no.
So one of the options for a developer, of course, is to look at not necessarily the Strata Corporation liquidating, but the developer just simply going in and buying up all the units and negotiating independently with each of the people in the building, if they can make that happen.
When we are seeing that occur, we
Yes.
know that there are developers out there who are coming in and are making offers to each and every owner, and they figure if they can get enough people agreeing to those offers, eventually they're going to have a significant enough majority of the units to control the process and have the strata terminated and redevelop it.
And so if we go down to 80% of the strata, the votes on the schedule of entitlement, then it also makes it easier in that perspective to vote in favor of a termination. So, but how do you prevent?
Well,
I-
Tony, it makes it easier, but let's assume you're one of the 20% who are
Yes.
voting no. You can still make an application to the court on the basis that it's significantly unfair and oppressive if, in fact, this termination takes place. And then the court can look at that.
So we still have the protection of the courts behind the minority groups in the event that an investor or someone is buying up 81% of the units and basically saying, look, we're not going to repair the buildings anymore. We're just going to force you into a sale at this point.
Correct.
So it's kind of it's a complicated process, isn't it?
It's complicated. It's time consuming and it's expensive.
Yeah, no, well, can you imagine for the average consumer in a condominium, they're dealing just with the day-to-day business of the strata, now having to function basically like corporate negotiators.
Yes, and you might wonder why the values are low in the existing building, or low enough in the existing building that it doesn't make sense for somebody to redevelop. Or maybe another way of asking the question is, why are the costs to move into the new building so much greater than what the assessed value or the market value of the old unit is? And what we cannot lose sight of is that a lot of these older strata corporations do not comply with code. They do not comply with a number of the bylaws of the municipality in which they're situate. And the reason they're okay is because they exist, and
Yes.
therefore what we call non-conforming. People like to call it grandfathering, but it's really non-conforming.
Right.
So that means, okay, if I'm non-conforming, that means I don't have to have sprinklers throughout my building. But if I knock it down and a new one's built and the developer has to get approval and development permits and building permits from the municipality, all of a sudden that sprinkler system's there.
Right.
The other safety features that are present now were never present 40 years ago. One of the concerns is that if in fact a building is approached by a developer and they say no, how difficult is it going to be for them to continue should the municipality decide that they're going to be a little bit more stringent on some of the non-conforming bases
Right.
that older building has.
Well, and that we're certainly seeing that. That's certainly one of the complications that are arising. And in addition to that, the developer is going to have the costs that are going to be imposed by the municipalities, which are significant. And the community development costs are significant in addition to the regular construction development costs. And so, all of that taken into consideration. It's an interesting discussion. We're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we're going to talk about the impact of density in areas and demand on property, because we have some properties in places like Abbotsford and Hope that are looking for redevelopment, but there's no density demand. And so the value isn't necessarily there, as opposed to a place at Metrotown or Brentwood Mall, where there is value in the property with respects to redevelopment. I'm Tony Giventu. This is Talk About Strata. If you'd like to reach us by email, it's radio@keypacific.com.
Delivering relevant and beneficial consumer information. This is Experts on Call. And there's more still ahead on AM 650.